This rare OBS F250 looked like it was finally coming back to life. This 5-speed 7.3 OBS was left forgotten in a barn 400 miles away till it popped up on my Facebook marketplace. It started and barely drove out of the barn where it was sitting for the last 5 years. After washing the years of neglect and farm life off it, ripping off the rusty bed, and fixing the destroyed crossmember, making it sit cockeyed.
Wow, look at that.
And when things were finally turning around for this truck, that was until it wouldn't turn on anymore. It stopped running, and no amount of jump starts or charging the batteries would get the 7.3 to light. But today, that changes. We're getting this 7.3 to clank back into life once again by rewiring the entire power system, then tearing into the front end so this thing will actually drive straight down the road. And if everything goes right, we'll finally take this thing on its first real test drive. And we're off. We'll start with the battery first. I'll pull the old crappy small battery I had in there as a temporary, since the truck had only one decent battery. Grab a fresh battery, put it in the truck and hook it up. Then crank it over. But it still wouldn't start. One new battery and the other battery's charged, and she's still not cranking. But I think I might have an idea why. The battery cables aren't in the best shape, and the terminals are holding on like my last relationship. Barely. These are the perfect storm for a no start, or a fire. This one is completely destroyed. I don't even know how this happens. Look at this thing. It's cracked in like 8 different spots. And when I climbed down below the truck, it got even worse. Look at this ground wire. That is the main ground wire going to the engine block. Thing is just exploded. I think it's time to retire those antiques and bring in some upgrades. Something heavy duty that'll deliver the juice this truck needs. And this cable kit from Big 7 Kits is exactly what the doctor ordered. Same great kit from the same great company that we installed in the other 7.3, just a different name. Both batteries get disconnected and come out. And the 2 bolts holding the starter get removed, so we can drop the starter down, and you'll see why in a second. The passenger side engine block ground comes out next. Followed by the connections on the starter solenoid up on the fender. The positive crossover cable pulls off, so we can go back below the truck and pull the starter out, with almost every positive cable in the system attached. Here it all is. The entirety of the positive battery starting and charging system is out. Wow, that was easy. It's easier to just drop the starter with all the cables attached, since it'll make putting on the new cables a whole lot easier. These are fine strand SAE approved pure copper cable. These cables are strong and gonna give that 7.3 faster starts. Or in my case, starts. Like the truck actually starts to begin with. The larger starter power cable comes off, followed by the smaller signal wire, and on goes our new one. Getting that little signal wire off and back on is 1,000 times easier when the starter's out of the truck. It's only 2 bolts to drop the starter, so might as well, since it saves a bunch of messing around with that little cable. With both attached to the starter, we can feed the new cables back up through the front subframe and bolt the starter back into the truck. Now, a quick note, because lots of people in my last F250 video gave me crap for not cleaning up the frame yet or doing a better job cleaning the underside of the motor and stuff where the oil cooler was. And the reason I'm not doing that, or actually cleaning up any of this, where the batteries sit and all that, and the motors, I mean, everything under here is covered in oil. The reason I'm not really degreasing everything and making it all nice while I'm in here is because, like, 70% of the truck is going to undergo I'm not going to tell you guys yet, I'll call it a procedure. And that procedure is going to degrease everything entirely, get off old paint. It's a very, very cool procedure. Some of you guys might know what I'm thinking, but I want to keep it a secret because it's going to be absolutely incredible. to do on this truck. Now I'm reaching down and pulling up through the positive cables from the starter, then removing this negative cable mounted to a stud on the passenger side of the engine, which is attached to this smaller ground cable going to the front fender I'm taking off now. And then the passenger side ground cable system's out. This stud is caked in oil, and since it's responsible for giving us a solid ground on this side of the engine, I'm gonna spray it down and scrub it clean. Then I'll take a piece of 80 grit sandpaper and scuff the area on the engine where the cable goes. It's a lot cleaner than before. Nice clean metal to metal contact for a good connection. Luckily, every cable's labeled, so I'm just putting on our new engine ground cable now. Then in goes our new battery. All the cables attached to the battery with these military-style corrosion-resistant battery terminals, which can now be installed. Followed by the negative defender ground, and the cables going to the starter relay solenoid. The positive cable from the battery goes on one post on the starter relay solenoid, and the cable up from the starter goes on the other. Onto the driver's side, and with a little torque and grunt, the stud holding on the engine block round cable spins off. I'll use a rag soaked with brake clean to clean up the oil buildup, then use some 80 grit sandpaper again to scuff up the mounting point on this side. There's one more ground cable screwed onto the cross member attached to the larger ground that can come off now. Then the driver's side ground setup comes out. That's the real bad one. Look at that. Look at this thing. How does that even happen? No wonder the thing didn't start. This is one hell of a satisfying job. The other battery goes in, then I use this self-pleasuring device from hell to clean the corrosion on the battery terminals on the old battery to ensure our fresh cables get to work at full capacity. The new terminals go on, I scuff up the fender where the small ground goes to the battery on this side, then feed the larger ground down to its spot on the engine block. I tighten it on, which wasn't the easiest thing in the world to do. Then I realized... Oh, I forgot the frame ground. Aha! So I scuffed down the cross member with sandpaper and file, fold one end of the smaller cable to the cross member, and the other end shares the stud on the engine block with the larger ground cable. Now I'm just connecting the crossover cable to one side's positive terminal and running it in its channel to the other positive battery terminal. And we're just about ready to start this thing. I'll attach all the ground wires to the negative terminals on each side, attach the positive cables to their posts, make sure the terminals are seated on the battery posts. A few taps with a rubber mallet helps with that. Adjust the terminals and routing the wires, and then... Alright, I believe we have everything hooked up correctly. Everything here on the passenger side, everything here on the driver's side means there's only one thing left to do. See if it starts. Oh, well, that's not great. It appears we have nothing at all. What did I do wrong? And after a quick scan around the engine bay, that might have something to do with it. The cable going to the solenoid, kind of important. So I hooked it up and tried again. That's better. Moment of truth. Wow. Nice. We're finally making some progress on our to-do list. Now we're going to tackle that worn-out steering. When I first got the truck into the garage, we gave the front steering and suspension a checkup to see what sort of shape it was in. And while most of it was okay, the tie rod end on the passenger side here was gone. The tie rod links are ties both front wheels so they turn together and stay aligned. And the tie rod end on mine appears to not have been greased since 1997. So off comes the cotter pin going through the castle nut, then the castle nut itself. I'll hand thread the nut back on so it doesn't fall out when I go to hit it out. Finally, after many whacks, here it comes. The tie rod's attached to the drag link, which has to get unbolted from here. The cotter pin comes off, followed by the nut. But once I break it loose, something happens that I've never run into before. So it appears that the nut here is stripped because it's just spinning and the stud is not. I think I'm just gonna have to chop it off, and looks like we'll be replacing this one as well. I'll order all that stuff in, but for now, while I'm waiting for that to arrive, we might as well start stripping some of the body, and because it is gonna be painted soon. And we'll start with the bug deflector. 6 Phillips head screws under the front of the hood come out. Then it just slides forward and off. Ugh. I'll just scrape off the little adhesive rubber things it rests on, and the deflector's off. Next, I'll climb under the truck to pull the running boards, which are in rough shape. I try to be nice and remove each and every bolt with a socket, but they're all too rusty and corroded, and just crumble. So I resort to grinding the heads off them. First one is off. The step on the driver's side's arguably even more rusted, so I don't even attempt to unbolt. But even with all the heads ground off, this one ain't budging. So I punch out every inch of remaining bolt. Finally, I'm an idiot. Now both steps are finally off the truck. Looks clean. Still waiting on parts I need to finish that front steering repair. But while I was under the truck, I found something that's gonna need attention, like now. Yeah, that's not supposed to happen. The U-joint on the rear drive shaft's gonna need to be replaced before this truck even thinks of going back on the road. This thing was probably last greased when that tie rod up front was. The drive shaft bolts to the transfer case output flange with 4 bolts. That's what transfers power from the transmission to the rear axle. Then comes off the 2 bolts holding the carrier bearing up on the cross member. I'll put a jack up to support the front, since this is a long 2-piece drive shaft. Ooh, thought she was coming down on me. And once on the ground, I can cut the zip ties holding the boot that covers the splines that connects the 2 shafts, and then separate them, but not without first scoring little lines in the metal to show exactly how everything aligned with each other. Now I'm pulling all the snap rings on the U-joint caps, but the U-joint was supposed to arrive today, which didn't, but what did arrive is the drag link. So with my little whizzer wheel, I'll cut off the nut that just keeps spinning. But because of the width of the blade and where the nut is, it won't cut all the way through. What the hell? So I resort to plan B. But being the solid piece of thick steel it is, wasn't even that easy. What the hell is holding this thing on? Not much. That little tiny bit is holding this whole thing up. Oh. Some more tooth-jarring sawzalling and slicing, we finally cut through the drag link. Before discovering another problem. About freaking time. Well, now that we have this down, the other side seemed fine, but now that it's disconnected on the other end, it's awfully easy to move. I'm gonna ask a real mechanic what they think. And the real mechanic said, change that one too. It too sounds like it hasn't been greased since '97 either. I'm sensing a theme here. I'll measure the threads on the drag link to try to keep things somewhat symmetrical when I put everything back together, then unthread the drag link from the adjuster. Jeez, how long is this thing? I'd say our new one looks much better than the old one. But besides that part, the rest of it looks the same. Now I'm just adding a little never sees to the threads in the new drag link and threading it back into the adjuster as close as it was before. Then removing the tie rod end going into the knuckle on the driver's side. I try to unthread the ends from the adjuster, but that doesn't work. So I put it back up in the knuckle and lightly thread on the nut, then loosen the adjuster sleeve to unthread the tie rod. That is, till I realize... Oh my gosh, I'm going the wrong way. Ugh. Give me some slack. This is my first time doing this. Once I turn it out the correct way, I get the adjustment sleeve and remaining tie rod into the vise so I can separate the two. And here's our new tie rod end, which gets a grease fitting fitted, as well as a dab of Never Sees on the threads, before getting threaded into the adjustment sleeve. We don't need the measurements quite yet. Now I'll fit a grease fitting to the new second half of the tie rod, dab of Never Sees, and it gets threaded in the opposite direction the other tie rod did, into the adjuster. I get both ends in, before putting one side into one knuckle, and then quickly taking it back off to readjust, since I can't get the other stud into the knuckle. I tighten back up the adjuster, but it still isn't right. It won't go into the knuckle. Oh, well, crap. So the next day, I try to put the opposite end first. I'll trick it, but same with the other way. When one stud gets fast into the knuckle, the other end is either too long or too short for the other side, like you see here. And after a million attempts and adjustments, I'm so far off what the measurements were on the track bar when I took it off. But now I'm just doing whatever I can to just get both tie rods into the knuckles. This truck's gonna need an alignment by a professional at some point anyway. But I finally get them both in, tighten the adjuster, make a few adjustments to get the drag link fitted into its spot on the tie rod, tighten down the castle nuts. Why is just one of these a different size socket? Why? But when I do find the right size socket, everything gets torqued down, new cotter pins inserted, and every fitting on the truck gets greased. As with the whole story that is this truck, I found yet another thing that needs fixing. The lower shock mount wiggles around like it's trying to dance. That should be solid. So once I eventually find the right size socket, I remove the lower shock bolt, and the bottom of the shock comes out. I'll have to find out what size bushing that is and order one in, but our U-joint came in. Neighbor Steve lent me this ball joint press tool that makes getting this old U-joint out a snap. Instead of pressing out a ball joint, I just press out one side of the U-joint so I can take the cap off, then it's free from the drive shaft, and to remove it from the yoke here, I press out another side, pop off the cap, and it's out. Well, that made it extremely easy. Now I'm cleaning up the spot where the U-joint's pressed into, and cleaning up any burrs with some sandpaper. See, that's a little better. Then Dad and I press in the new U-joint. We put on all the retaining clips, thread in the grease fitting, and the new Spicer U-joints in, and the drive shaft's ready to go back into the truck. I make sure the lines we made are lined up, so we can slide one half of the drive shaft back into the other. But obviously I was slightly off, since it refused to go into the other drive shaft's hole. But after decades of finagling, the back half accepted the front half, and could go back up into the truck as one. Alright, well I have Steve's nice ball joint tool here. I'm going to try to use this to press out the lower shock mount bushing, because the replacement finally came in. I tried a few different sized adapters with the tool, but nothing's working. It's just not going on straight and even, which made me angry enough to start clawing at the bushing by hand, and that actually managed to remove the bushing from the lower mount. Guess I didn't need the puller. That looks, yeah, that's the same. A little grease goes on to help it slide on in. Then I tried to use Steve's ball joint tool to press it in, which didn't work. Not sure why I do the things that I do. I think I'm just gonna have to take the whole shock off. Because with the entire shock out, I had the brilliant plan to use the vise to press in the bushing, which at first didn't seem too brilliant. But after adding a washer behind the bushing to help evenly press it, Finally, there it goes. It's most of the way in. You just have to... There it goes. Beautiful. I mount the shock up top first, but when I went to put the bottom in... Yeah, that doesn't seem right. Not in the slightest. What I'm guessing is that... I'm thinking there should be a metal sleeve in there because the bolt has an awful lot of room to just float around. On these, it's the right size. Solid in there, but very floppy in here. I think this needs a sleeve. With no local stores appearing to have such a piece, I got impatient. The front steering was now as solid as a rock, the drive shaft wasn't wiggling around, and we've got fresh new rear brakes and cables. The truck mechanically mostly should be sorted. You know, I think it's time. I think it's time for a test drive. Sure, the shock in the back might not be all set, but I don't think we need it. Let's see how this thing drives. This truck may look arguably worse than it did when it last drove out from its 5-year bar nap onto my trailer, but mechanically, it's 10 times better, hopefully. Just need to adjust that fresh new parking brake. Quite the noise. Nice that works. And we're off. I mean, it's driving not well at all. Still hasn't really turned much, and the steering wheel's almost upside down. Does shift a lot better now that the rear brakes aren't stuck. The whole truck vibrated, not like tires out of balance vibrating. Well, that too, but it was like the motor seemed to be shaking. Didn't discourage me, it motivated me. So I found out where I could get a sleeve for the rear shock bushing. Not that that was the main issue with the truck anyways, but every piece here matters. I found a steel spacer at, of all places, Lowe's, that should work as a bushing. I lubed it up, gave it a few love taps to encourage it into the bushing, and... Haha, would you look at that? Fits perfect. But as I went to put the shock back into the mount, I thought I found yet another problem. Wherever I put the shock, it stayed. It wouldn't self-extend, it wouldn't push out. I just realized this shock, when I put it up, doesn't extend back on its own. That doesn't... I'm an idiot, but I don't know if that's right. So I called the roundest head mechanic I know to get some input. Mechanic Tyler said that this is the way that those shocks go. They just slowly decompress themselves. So that means we are all set to get this one installed. I'd have no problem throwing new shocks in back here, but these ones aren't that old, from what I was told. And for what it's worth, even though it seemingly took 10 minutes, the shocks did eventually extend on their own when I pushed it in. And with the shock bolted back in, oh yeah, that's much better. That's quite the improvement. Since we changed the oil already, I'm gonna change the fuel filter now too, since who knows how long it's been since that's been changed. but there wasn't a drain hose for the fuel bowl, so I made my own. Then my camera short-circuited and refused to film any of the filter change. Awesome! But when I climbed in the truck to take it for a test drive, we have got a long way to go with this truck, and things get only more challenging from here. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you're not yet subscribed, I'm trying to hit 100,000 subscribers. We're so close. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. It all helps get this OBS back to its former glory. But I'll see you guys in the next one. Happy motoring.